This time last year, I spoke about a missed opportunity. I spoke about how the budget should be judged on the impact of the lives of the families of those living in hotels and patients in hospital trolleys. So now, a year on, what have been the results? In October 2016, when last budget was announced, there were 2,470 homeless children in the state. Last month, there were 3,048, Taoiseach. That is what you and Budget 2017 delivered. That is what the so-called centre of Irish politics delivers. The government, with Fianna Fáil support, came in here last year and cut over £500 million of taxes in that budget. And they have the audacity to come back in here again this year and propose more of the same, while our citizens are being denied their basic rights. In the real world, in modern Ireland, in the year of 2017, there are people dying on our streets because of the housing crisis. Out there in today's Ireland, the equivalent of the population of roughly 10 counties, nearly 700,000 people, are currently languishing on hospital waiting lists, many in chronic pain, waiting and waiting on much-needed operations, while other patients are left in hospital trolleys, in our A&E departments and in hospital wards, like the 514 who today were in hospital trolleys. Yet Fine Gael, their independent friends and Fianna Fáil have come in here today and told us that now is the time to cut taxes and to return to the boom and bust politics of the past. At the centre of this budget is a lie, Minister. It is a lie that you promote that we can fix the health service and the housing crisis while at the same time cutting people's taxes. Those who support this budget, the same as they did last year, knew it was a lie. The same lie that you tried to spin last year. And it says something about how little the government can achieve when its main claim about this budget is that it will balance the books. Minister, you know that it's possible to balance the books while at the same time beginning a process of sorting out the crisis in health and housing. You know this because Sinn Féin showed you how it can be done. We have demonstrated that in our alternative budget. But what your vision and your version of balancing the books means, what does it mean? Did you ever ask yourself what does it mean for the child who hears their mother locked in the bathroom of their hotel room night after night crying because that mother believes that she has failed her daughter? Or what does it mean for the parents who have to watch their children suffer in pain because they can't access treatment in our crumbling health service? Or how comforting is your version of balancing the books for the elderly man who was this morning lying on a hospital trolley? Because these are the realities of your policies, and you may not want to hear it. But this is a result of what you have done last year and years before. And you're further normalising these policies here today with the help of Fianna Fáil. Unfortunately, the only conclusion that we can come to, Minister, is that you simply don't get it. You don't get what it's like to have to wait and wait to access hospital service while suffering in pain. You don't get what it's like to have to wait in a hospital trolley and suffer the loss of dignity that goes with that. You don't get what it's like to be a frontline worker working in these circumstances. And you don't get what it's like to bring up your kids in a hotel, having them walk through the hotel corridors in their school uniforms each morning while other hotel guests look on in bemusement. Because, Minister, even if you got this a little bit, you wouldn't come in here today and prioritise tax cuts. Because every cent that you put into tax cuts is money that you take away from building our health services and delivering homes for homeless. This is a budget that tolerates and normalises mass homelessness of our young children and older people. It is a budget that normalises our crumbling health services. And the people deserve better than that. Sinn Féin will not stand over these choices, and it is a disgrace that this is the best that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael can cobble together. Minister, I ask you, where is the urgency? As I said, there are people dying on our streets, or haven't you noticed? Minister, in the midst of the darkest days of the recession, in 2012, there were fewer kids in homelessness, there were fewer kids in poverty than there are today, 5 years later. There was also fewer people in trolleys and fewer people on hospital waiting lists. That is the legacy. That is your legacy, and the ministers who stand and applaud and cheer you on as you have delivered budget after budget. The need to be seen to cut taxes means that this budget amounts to too little spend, too thin for services that people use every day of their lives. But you did manage to find, and fair play to you, I'm sure your ministerial colleagues are patting you on the back, you did manage to find a few bob for pet projects. We see deep in the documents that you produced today, on page 132, that you found €5 million each year and every year for your new spin machine. Although, previously, if we were to believe the Taoiseach, Mr Leo Varadkar, he told us that it would be cost neutral. So how come it's costing €5 million a year? And as we know, that's the equivalent of 50 resource teachers. Is the equivalent of not only those 50 resource teachers, but 56 SNAs. But you believe that the image of the government is more important than actually putting that money into frontline investments. But also the government is going to increase capital expenditure on public transport by a measly €9.6 million. We have argued, for example, that €170 million on public roads and transport should be done this year, 17 times more than the government's figure. But what is incredible, given the state of our roads and public transport, that the government is going to spend almost as much as opening Step-Aside Garda Station for Minister Shane Ross than he is on the entire new public transport services within the same minister's department. Minister, your entire energy was spent in negotiating tax cuts, and health, housing and other needs of the population has to do with whatever is left over. The result of that is that 12 months' time we'll be back here, and we'll be arguing over the last 11 months before that. It'll be taken up with how come the health service is just as bad as it was, or even worse, and how come waiting lists are growing longer, and how come the housing crisis hasn't gone away. Well, the answer to that is today. The answer to that is because you have decided to prioritise other areas. You have no new targets for home to be delivered extra in housing. It is unbelievable, Minister, in a €1.2 billion package, that you have not an additional social house to be delivered as a result of that package. It is just crazy, Minister. There is a housing crisis there. It is not acceptable that you target, after spending €1.2 billion, the same amount of delivery in social housing as you did in the middle of this year. And that is your priorities, and because your priorities with Fianna Fáil is about negotiating tax cuts, €335 million in income tax cuts, when genuinely I believe that the people want to see you challenge and address the crisis that we have in housing and homelessness. Because we have not lost our values as a people. We do not accept the fact that our children have to live in this situation day in and day out. But you have obviously gone and had your focus groups and you had your polling data done, as did Fianna Fáil, and believe that tax cuts and USC cuts and marginal changes is what will get you the votes the next time round. Ar na Bartas Kenya is a budget on grey locked de Eichel. Neil planner being Shaw, Yelona budget to be curry le killer for Yeffer, and this Gerhiglish and Realtas a Shackwall, a crew Gunira go Galiv, le were good Galton is locked a Holinu. Is Nanyo ne Shaw, ta physic Modi and Walla, Guniernish of Prekash Cart, o he on the Barta at Walu of new. And I do want to congratulate both Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael in winning the battle over which tax cuts to make. Two tax-cutting parties can't decide which way to cut the taxes, so you cut it twice. Absolute geniuses. And I'm sure that type of political theatre, which has been playing out on our TV screens and on the plinth in Leinster House over the last couple of days, was of great interest to our homeless families. Cutting the USC and widening the tax bands will help some people, but it will help some people more than others. And those who benefit the most are those who earn the most. Giving somebody on an income of €20,000 a measly €53 a year back is pathetic. Somebody on €25,000, €66 back, just over €1 a week. 30,000, those on 30,000 are in line for a life-changing amount of €78 per annum, while they have to put up with crumbling services being delivered by this government. And this is stark, because 50% of our population have incomes under €1,000, and they're in line for a €1.50 a week increase. While Fianna Fáil, the custodians for equality, have managed to ensure that this budget package includes a reduction in USC of the 5% rate, meaning that those incomes earning in excess of €70,000 will get €328 per annum back. That's 4 times what half the population will get back under their package. For a package of personal tax measures worth €335 million, the major benefit goes to those on much higher than the average incomes. And to put that in context, particularly for those who want to purchase a house or those who are trying to set off in life and think about purchasing a house in the future, the €1.50 per week you have to measure that against house prices rising at €50 a day. More importantly, Minister, it amounts to spare change while our public services, while our infrastructure are still recovering from the brutality of the austerity years. If there's one thing a budget can do, it is that it can really shape the physical shape of the country that we live in and set out a vision for infrastructure of the country. That is a challenge, to have the foresight and political courage to invest in the long-term interests of the people. Sadly, the Minister doesn't do long-term. Another year without the imagination to invest in our railways, our roads, our schools, our hospitals and our cross-border infrastructure passes us by. In normal times, Minister, that would be a mistake. It would be a bad mistake. At a time when we're facing the threat of Brexit, it's unforgivable. The measures announced today are at best weak and at worst counterproductive. Brexit could lead to up to a 7% drop in GNP, and nothing that you have announced today will help the Irish state prepare for that. Now is the time to build up our defences, to look at our transport hubs, to bring balance to the state and look to our towns and cities outside of Dublin. The failed Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil model of tax breaks for private developers, funded by selling public assets, is a disaster waiting to happen. The Minister talks about Brexit, launches an odd scheme here and there, but misses the big picture. The Minister said he's up for taking us on a journey. It's one where he's selling off the wheels to pay for the petrol. The short-sightedness of this budget is staggering. It ignores those who will bear the brunt of this lack of vision. Your plan for a loan scheme for Brexit doesn't get to the heart of the issue, which is to invest to meet the challenges of Brexit. The Minister's capital expenditure plan is miserly in comparison to what Sinn Féin advocated of €1.6 billion. The Minister's plan will struggle to cover depreciation costs alone, never mind the type of increased capacity that is so desperately needed. This would be the case if all of the capital spend was to be direct spend, but we know it's not. Not just Brexit, but changes in how America faces out to the world and how the EU manages its affairs are coming, as we all know. These are things largely beyond our control, and we are a small boat in an open sea. What we can control is our own infrastructure. We can make sure our transport, our energy, our water systems are fit for purpose. We can make sure that we have the strongest base going into choppy waters. And that is the sensible thing to do, but the Minister doesn't do sensible. This is why you've decided on tax cuts again, instead of investing sufficiently in capital expenditure. The Government's capital investment plan puts capital investment at 2.16% of GNP for 2018. That is shockingly low level of capital investment. It is both reckless and unsustainable, and one of the lowest in the European Union. Now, you will tell us what will happen in 2021, but it is at this point in time and next year that we need to see the ramped-up investment. For every euro in tax cuts, up to €4 could have been spent in capital investment that would have been smoothed out over the next number of years. It is a shocking use of what limited space that we had in this year's budget, and the budget fails the Brexit test because it fails the investment test. As I said, our capital investment plan fighting Brexit would have increased capital investment by €1.65 billion above the Government's plans, resulting in a capital investment to GNP rate of 2.84%. Spinning announcements won't see off the challenges of Brexit, but a well-planned, ambitious capital plan will give the boost to the economy that it needs. This is not a budget, Minister, fit for a country catching up on infrastructure, and with a young and growing population. The state's infrastructure is creaking after years of investment drought. and more international investors and companies identify this infrastructural deficit as the biggest issue facing our country, and yet you miss the opportunity to deal with that sufficiently in this budget. Let's look at what you've announced in health and compare it to the reality of what is needed. From the budget document, we see that 646 million of an increase in current expenditure. So let's examine what health needs just to stand still. Not to improve any services, not to reduce the amount of people on trolleys, not to reduce the waiting times on waiting lists or the numbers on those lists. Health needs 129 million for demographics. That is for population growth and ageing in 2018. Health needs 165 extra to cover the cost of pay agreements, and it needs 97 million of carryover, i.e. that is the cost of measures that were introduced last year, and the full effect of them will take place in 2018. It also needs a budget increase of 300 million to cover the overspend, that is, to properly fund what is actually being delivered in our hospitals. So, in summary, Minister, health actually needs an increase of 691 million this year or next year simply to stand still. This government and its backers in Fianna Fáil have chosen to leave our health system short of money that is needed to stand still. And that is why we have that number of patients in trolleys. That is why we have a list that is out of control. That is why people are waiting over and over and over again for operations. In real terms, you're cutting the health budget at a time of deep crisis. Our health system will be in a worse shape this time next year as a consequence of the budget that you brought before us. And it is another massive failure on your part to invest in health because it is simply not a priority. You simply don't understand, Minister, and your government doesn't understand the gap between where our health system is and where it could be. Every day, rights are being violated because of the underfunding of our health system. Not that you would know listening to the Minister as he balances the books, but our health system is on its knees, from primary and community care to our acute hospitals and everything in between. Only last month, senior doctors in the Irish Hospital Consultants Association warned that there was clear evidence that our acute hospitals are beginning to fail. The continuous crisis in our health services has meant that people have become almost immune to the shocking stories and news about it. But this can never be normalised. In January this year, 612 patients were left in trolleys, the highest ever recorded number of patients in trolleys in the history of this state. That is not normal. Currently, there are nearly 690,000 people waiting for surgeries across the state, the highest number ever recorded. That is not normal. As of May, there were 29,688 people waiting on a first-time occupational therapy consultation. Nearly half of these were children and teenagers. That is not normal. The list goes on. It's a litany of shame. And you have failed to run a functioning health service and are continuing to preside over such failures. And let me explain in one story how bad your failures have been over the course of your government since 2011. During that time, this is what happened to a child in Dublin. She is just one, but thousands of examples that could be recited here today. The child in question was diagnosed with scoliosis, and her parents were told she needed surgery. The young girl joined the waiting list like many others, and she waited and waited and waited. She was left waiting almost 2 years for her spinal fusion surgery. Because she was left waiting so long, the surgery didn't take correctly, and the young girl's spine continued to curve. The screws in her spine have now become loose, and they're causing her severe pain. The young girl, she's now back in the spinal fusion list for scoliosis surgery again, and she's in chronic pain, and she has been waiting almost 6 months for her second surgery, but no set date as of yet. And that's a result of your policies. Did you intentionally do that to that girl? Of course you didn't. Nobody would set out to do that. But when you come in here and underfund our health system, let's be clear, that is what happens. People will be in pain, lists will get longer, patients will be left languishing on hospital trolleys because of the actions and inaction of your government. These are your policies, and that is what they lead to, Minister, and there's no shying away from that. And this is not normal, no matter how often it happens. Your failures in health not only destroy the morale of diligent staff in our health service, but they also put lives at risk. And no doubt they have cost lives too. But to what ends? This is not the fallout of ambivalence. This is policy. It is your policy. It is the commodification of healthcare and the dereliction of the role of the state in protecting the sick and the vulnerable. Cégur Hannig méadúir an budget sláinte neri, níor bhaid an tarigid seoach leis an seirbhísí a choinneáil a bhaim. Bhí ceithí suntas a deanta an budget sláinte de 2012 agus 2015. Agus mar chathú áru ten muoine méadaithe a ógairt agus de dhí chun na barnaí na líonú. Because the health spend was cut so significantly in the years 2012 through 2015, this leaves the health service using any slight funding increase to essentially plug gaps that your cuts have led to. We can see what these cuts and the privatisation agenda has meant for patients, but what has it meant for staff? The recruitment moratorium in the health service, which was introduced by Fianna Fáil 2 years before any other sector of the public service, severely damaged our health service. So too did the continuation of this policy. Your policies and inability to address the problems in the sector have reaped a whirlwind on the health service. As a result, we are now faced with a recruitment and retention crisis in our health system as staff leave or even refuse to countenance working in the system. And what has the government's response been? For the Minister for Health to come out and beg healthcare staff to give the HSE another chance and to work in Ireland. And this comes brazenly in spite of the HSE and this government repeatedly ignoring healthcare professionals' basic appeals for better working conditions, adequate training and fair play. As Dr David Tansey said in a letter to the Irish Times just last week, where he said such a response illustrates a worrying indifference on the part of the government to addressing the reasons behind why so many of our young healthcare professionals are immigrating. Such a cavalier attitude to expecting young doctors and nurses to return to a HSE in a worse state than it was 5 years ago, just because the Minister asked them to, is both naive and disrespectful to medical professions on the front line. Minister, there is no doubt that this government has no plan for healthcare. He's inherited a crisis and it seems you have no intention of fixing it. Even beyond funding, you will not embrace the reform initiatives that are needed. There does have to be better ideas and better management of the funding that is provided. And take, for example, the idea of a single integrated waiting list management system, which could create a national waiting list for patients and for procedures. Such a master waiting list could utilise the full capacity of our hospitals and the skill sets of our doctors and nurses to allow patients to have their procedures carried out quicker in a hospital that has the ability to do so, rather than waiting for months for a single hospital. Sinn Féin have pushed this idea for over 2 years now, under the name Cóliste. And despite promises from the Minister for Health to pilot such a project, there has been little movement. That is a constructive idea. What do we get from Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil? More money to the National Treatment Purchase Fund, outsourcing our health system. Fianna Fáil said that Fine Gael is bereft of any new ideas in terms of the health system, but the only idea that they've come forward is the one that they came up with years ago, which was to privatise part of the health system. Putting money into the National Treatment Purchase Fund will not significantly reduce waiting lists. It will just divert much-needed funds from the public sector to the private sector. And to the benefits from this, because it won't be patients waiting for surgeries. Instead, it will be private interests who seek to profit from people's sicknesses and illnesses. Sinn Féin do have a plan. It's called universal healthcare, and it works. We all accept investment is not the only answer to the issues in our health system, but anybody who dismisses it as anything other than key to improving our health system is wrong. There is no way to deliver the 500 extra beds next year, which we believe is needed to tackle the A&E scandal, without more investment. There is no way that the 250 extra nurses and midwives for maternity services that need to be delivered can be delivered other than through the public purse. This investment should be the start of a move towards universal healthcare. That is the way to end the permanent state of crisis in our hospitals and other services.
Ar the carta déine in Yultuag the where policy and realtas can track the yenu naspa muinu at a hortar go hospital pasta. Mar a dirt me tabala ella bala nis carme, ac an drochwer tahan comer in scale you, na will fun a nara hon a nestia kia yenu, agus na yasi key a hor agree. There is another way, Minister, but unfortunately I hear no evidence from the Government that they are up for the investment or the reform that is needed. It is clear from the announcements today that the health of our people will have to wait another year to be considered a priority, it would seem. The Government's record when it comes to people with disabilities has been appalling. The fact that we are the last remaining EU state to ratify the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of Persons with Disability, despite being the first to sign up, speaks for itself. More or nere. Minister McGrath has made this his Alamo. On the day the Government is cutting over €300 million of taxes, the Independence Alliance have to stake it all on delivering €3 million from the budget for the basic rights of people with disabilities. 300 million tax cuts is fine. 3 million to implement the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of Persons with Disability is controversial. People with disabilities in Ireland are almost twice at risk of living in poverty than the general population. There is a serious lack of appropriate, accessible, private and social housing. There is a lack of accessible and readily available public transport, parking in public spaces. People with disability have great difficulty finding and retaining employment. Respite care services fall well short of what is required, and the amount of personal assistance hours don't even come close to what is needed. And parents are being forced to spend hundreds of euros every month on private therapy if they want to see their child talk, walk, or have any hope of realising their individual potential. The situation as it stands is dire. And Budget 2018 was an opportunity for the Government and for Fianna Fáil to make a real difference in the lives of those who are living with disability in Ireland. For our part, Sinn Féin has put forward our proposals as part of our costed alternative. The disability allowance would have been increased under our proposals to €6, and the need of people for disabilities in education and housing would be addressed. Minister, I am sure you are aware that today is World Mental Health Day. Thankfully, in recent years there has been a sea change in our attitudes as a society towards mental health. But unfortunately, the resources have not always followed the more progressive thinking, and today is no different. In mental health, the Government have yet again theoretically allocated the magic €35 million figure. It is not the first time. They announce this every year. The actual full spend has yet to materialise. It is literally a copy and paste from last year's budget document, which is about as much thought as the Government ever give to this vital issue of mental health. Young people with mental health issues in Ireland are suffering at the hands of severe underfunding. They are among the most vulnerable citizens, yet we are not protecting or respecting their rights. Currently, staffing levels at the child and adolescent mental health CAM services are a meagre 53% staffing levels of those recommended under a Vision for Change, which is causing excessively long waiting lists and endless distress for young people and their parents. As of July 2017, Minister, there were 2,400 children and young people were waiting assessment by CAMS. These young people and their families face travel issues due to inordinate distance that they have to travel to access mental health care. We need 12 additional child and adult mental health teams. That would cost €8.9 million in 2018. Is it not, Minister, a worthwhile investment for your Government to make? There is agreement across the mental health community that the implementation of a Vision for Change has been incomplete and uneven, despite widespread support across service users and providers. They are not my words, they are the mental health reform's words. And this is a damning indictment not only of Fine Gael's failure to commit to and drive the mental health strategy, but also of Fianna Fáil's. 11 years have passed since the strategy was first launched. Mental health reform's recent review also identifies a number of policy shortfalls within the strategy itself. Shortfalls that have been exacerbated by the emergency in social and affordable housing and failure to adequately protect the rights of mental health service users. We do have to do better. Tabala alin sverda yi, kair frastal or reactness a bubble edakala more slenchete. And this is about real people in their lives, not a political game, as Fianna Fáil said, not a game that should be played out in the media. And let's talk about some of those real lives. In 2017, a woman in James Connolly Hospital was found to have taken her own life in a side room in the emergency department. All psychiatric beds were occupied. She had nowhere to go, and staff had no ability to care for her properly. This tragic story is not exceptional, unfortunately, Minister. Deputy MacDonald previously raised the case of Ryan Dempsey, with the former Taoiseach having met his family. A young man, just 22 years of age, he died alone in a ward off the A&E in St James's Hospital, without hope that he would get the care that he so desperately needed. He had presented to A&E and had been discharged 5 times in the last 6 months. There was never a place for him, Minister. Ryan and others were failed by a system which is not fit for purpose due to decades of neglect and underfunding. CAM services in places like Cork have turned away children who have expressed suicidal thoughts because they simply can't take on any more cases. Staffing levels in the service are just over 50%, with this chaotic environment taking a huge toll on those working there. In Cherry Orchard in Dublin, 11 CAMS beds were closed this year out of a total of 63 across the state, well below the promised 100. The unit Lindara was opened just 2 years ago. And Sinn Féin's alternative budget provided for an additional £51 million investment in mental health services and care. We identified a number of areas where additional funding is urgently needed. Needed, not wanted, not wished for, needed to keep people alive. Instead of the government have allocated only £35 million, a highly doubtful figure. Community mental health 24/7 crisis intervention needs to move beyond the current Monday to Friday weekday service. If we are to have crisis service that is fit for purpose, we need to move, Minister, to a 7-day roster. Currently, at-risk and vulnerable people are being left with no option but to attend emergency departments or Garda stations, and this is wholly inappropriate. Sinn Féin would have tripled the current budget for counselling and primary care. We would increase the number of mental health and intellectual disability nurses, and we would fund counsellors and other mental health services for people in direct provision, and better resource our suicide crisis assessment nurses. Minister, the 10th of October today is not just Budget Day, it is also World Homeless Day. And I don't know if the Minister was aware of that when he announced his budget for next year. No additional social housing units on existing targets. No additional social housing units on additional targets. €1.2 billion at your disposal. No additional social housing units on existing targets. It is appalling, Minister. No capital investment in affordable homes. Limited funds on getting vacant units into use. Only 3,000 units on the social housing targets through to 2021 above the existing plans. No change to overall social housing targets. The existing target is 5,869. That was when Simon Coveney was Minister. 5,869. Today, you announced the target for next year is 5,900. £26 million for repair and release is a very low level of investment in securing access to vacant properties. There should be 10 times this investment in repair and release to deliver units. £25 million for local investment housing activation fund. No guarantee that any of these units will be affordable within that fund. Where is the vacant home tax? Doesn't exist. Didn't materialise. Not one of the government's priorities. Current estimates indicate that houses and developments such as Cherrywood benefiting from this scheme will be selling houses for €340,000 to €440,000. £750 million from the ISIF for commercial investments, the HBFI, which is a NAMA for private developments. Like LIHAF, there is no guarantee that this will deliver affordable units. Proof that the government have given up on our banks doing their job in the economy. It's an amount that says we have no intention of eradicating homelessness in this small, wealthy country of ours. It is an allocation that says that this government is okay with children living in hotels. Because, Minister, how did you do this? How did the Cabinet sign off on a €1.2 billion package and not deliver an additional social house? Did anybody at Cabinet table not say, maybe we should build another couple of social houses? We have €1.2 billion at our disposal here. You're going to announce it at 1 o'clock. Nobody pipe up at Cabinet. I cannot understand for the life of me how you can stand over that type of budget. Everything you announced is things that have been announced 6 months ago. It's unbelievable. I just can't get it. We expected the government would do what the government always does, but we would expect you at least to pay lip service to the issue. You didn't even go that far. This isn't a priority for you at all, Minister. Not at all. Today we learn of a new plan, new to government, but one we've been calling for years. One Sinn Féin has legislation actually before the Shannon. It's in relation to use the architecture of NAMA to deliver housing. NAMA's governance structures needs to be completely overhauled, but the architecture is there as an off-balance sheet vehicle to actually deliver houses. I put this to the Minister for Finance last year. He rejected the need for any such thing. I wrote to Leo Varadkar and sent him the legislation a number of weeks ago, and I'm glad to hear that the Minister is now tinkering with the idea of going down this road, and we'll tease that out in full detail when the legislation comes before us. But, Minister, none of the plans that you've outlined so far are working. You have plans after plans, announcement after announcement, but the housing crisis is getting worse. Every section of the housing market is affected. Not enough council homes, cost and rent spiralling out of control, inflated house prices, and the figures speak for themselves. Over 8,000 people homeless and over 3,000 children homeless. Many of these children have spent or will spend 2 years in emergency accommodation. Earlier this month, the Government Special Rapporteur on Child Protection said that emergency accommodation denied children several rights, including the right to health and education, and it compromised their ability to develop. There are 90,000 households on council waiting lists. Many of these have been waiting for 10 years and more. Rents are continuing to rise to unsustainable levels, and if you're lucky enough to secure rental accommodation, tenants are often subjected to overcrowding conditions, insecure tenure and poor quality surroundings. The government's solution to this is to go back to bedsits, looking back for an easy option instead of developing progressive solutions. Local authorities have been starved of the central government resources necessary to conduct inspections of rented accommodations, and there is simply not enough building going on. Flawed government statistics do not accurately reflect the number of new builds coming on stream. Vacant houses blight our city centres and are dotted across the countryside, but yet no vacant home tax. Government has tried the carrot approach. Private developers have been offered public money for site infrastructure in return for affordable housing units. Unfortunately, the government has no definition of affordable, apart from it means different things in different places. The provision of affordable homes for rental or sale is unfortunately not a priority for this government. Plans to develop or roll out a cost rental model were announced and then you abandoned it. In some ways, Minister, the answer is easy. It's build more houses. That hasn't happened enough because Fine Gael doesn't believe in social housing. There is no other explanation to it. The state, before any private build is taken into account, should deliver 10,000 social housing units next year. No excuses, Minister, it's our responsibility. We need a new affordable housing programme to build affordable houses in public land that are made available to families earning less than €75,000. We need to provide our local councils with the capital needed to deliver affordable rental units. And this is the scale of investment that is needed. Sean Duchlan at Esargor, at the Sinn Féin Ray from the Honye. It is the challenge that we face, Minister, but Sinn Féin is up for it. No gimmicks, no spin, no tax breaks, houses for the people. We've shown in our alternative budget how we could deliver 10,000 social houses in 2018 and 4,500 affordable houses. Minister, this state continues to be decades behind how other countries value, finance and legislate for early years education and care. Currently, we're spending little more than 0.1% on early years services in the state. We're at the bottom of the OECD table in relation to expenditure on early childhood educational institutions, and the result is raised costs for parents, unsustainable services and poor paying conditions for those in the early years workforce. The type of start we give our children inevitably impacts their progress for life. There is an intrinsic link between working conditions of those responsible for children and the quality of care and outcomes. What is required is investment in paying conditions for those we entrust to mind our children and a genuine state subsidy scheme for all parents who choose to use childcare services so that childcare is affordable. Many childcare workers have gone to great lengths to obtain qualifications and training, yet low pay means that they do not see a long-term career in childcare being financially viable, and that must change. They deserve to be paid a fair wage, matching the importance of their career. And this is a budgetary matter because the state ultimately subsidises the wages of those workers. We want an early years and childcare sector which we can be proud of and which is reliable, high quality and affordable to all. And we're a long way off that. And once again, this year's budget chooses not to address it. When it comes to early years investment, the grand and much leaked announcements fall far short of what is actually required. As we produced in our alternative budget, we proposed an investment some 5 times that of the government. Our proposals are both affordable and deliverable with the political will. But this government has decided not to take the side of struggling parents, of childcare workers or community providers. The Minister again is making hollow promises because parents which the sector simply cannot deliver because the investment figures are falling short. We cannot build, Minister, a modern economy with childcare on the cheap. The state must put its resources into childcare as a priority. But our younger citizens and their parents don't have, it's clear from this budget, the government on their side. And the 20 million doesn't cut it. The second mortgage many families faces in childcare bills will not be reduced by this budget. Last week, Minister, thousands, I don't know if you noticed, but thousands of students, third-level students, took to the streets to demand investment and reject a student loan system. They were not marching for themselves, but for future education for all. They must be the wrong sort of people because their demands are going unheeded in this budget. You speak about giving families a break, but for tens of thousands of families, you had it in your power to remove the huge burden of beginning the process to abolish the student fees. You chose not to. This budget is about letting our education system carry on as usual. The issues of modernisation and funding are ignored. Tá chiú in eistíart ag táisiil go géir chun rangan na ní slú a hacadú, agus le hé ní smó muintirí agus sicálaíochta idir aircu. Ach bartaí an rialta seo neamhhaird ar an bhog a dhéanú dífa seo. Níl mar an choras an éireú mar chud den budget seo a chun poistí scala idir bun scalna agus man scalna. The government again had other priorities. It's not just childcare and education that our young families need and won't get from this budget. This is a young country. Yet it is the young that gain less when taxes are cut and lose most when short-term policies are adopted. This is not a budget for the young of our country, for those whose education is dependent on parents being able to afford student fees that should be lowered. Nor it is a budget for young families trying to save for a home or simply to pay the rent. Their right to housing has been relegated below tax cuts. Even more directly, the budget carries on with very direct discrimination against young job seekers. They are considered less deserving of help from the state than their older siblings. Young civil servants, young teachers, young nurses, young Gardaí have to wait for pay equality. It could be different. This budget could have been a budget for a young country. This should be the budget, and would have been if Sinn Féin were in government, where pay equality was begun for all of our civil servants, our teachers, our Gardaí and our nurses, where young job seekers got equal treatment, as is their right, where real measures to make it possible for a working family to buy a home were put in place. But this government isn't on the side of young people. Discrimination, but isn't just limited to young people. The shameless cuts to the pension bands and rates in 2012 that left so many people, mainly women, with lesser pensions hasn't been addressed. There are 35,000 people who are just get on with life receiving less than others because they have left work for periods, mainly to raise their family. But that wasn't a priority in your budget. I welcome the increase in the state pension, but the deeper issues of inequality and pension system have been left unresolved. And I do question why people on social welfare packages have to wait later in the year to receive those increases. And there is absolutely no justification for that whatsoever, in my view. All of those, in terms of working age recipients, would have, under our proposals, received a €5 increase, and those with disabilities a €6 increase as of the beginning of the year. A less equal Ireland is what this budget will deliver for young people and for those women who have fallen out of one of the worst traps of the austerity programme. Ag ddíris ar an Gaeltacht agus an Gaelic, tá fála dhéanú ar an rialtas ar bhaint na Gaeltachta agus ar an Gaelic chéin. Ten Gaelic and Wheel and Wesh mar hang a pobl to the Jim Yana. Been an Changa Hena, Clownu Hon Nikilye, August Achrish Yenu of were Valley a line the Gaelic is a Wadget Shaw. Agniel Tokagan Realtus doing a Corrigale. Muin and Tara is that Joe McHugh and Gaelic dollar Yarth when Yarth. Leary Figgery and Dana are doing got a waller to take guest. We chitcham the PhD from Gate the country Lahill and the Gael Tarta and Mayo. Or Jig from Gate the country Lahill a Gary. August chitcham the quick jig from Gate the country Lahill and Nunanal, Mahonda Hen. Shin chitcham the Heen jig from Gate the country Lahill the Canter Gael Tarta. August in Van and chitcham Foster or Lean the country Gaelic or Fodden Stetch. Akniro. Ní anu ó dhéhhílas ort agus dhéhhílas ceathair déag, hanig luidú de ortman nui fan géad budget na Gaeilge, na Gaeltarta agus na Ellen. Tá sé bheith chipi go háit leis an strateis bhí bíon agus drogalar an rialtas plán gríomhíochta áilsiú le na cospaí leogan na mágus sonra. Tá toghlaí na Gaeilge agus an Gaeltart go bre go mór an eisir dhéhhartas. Si sin an policy ideas Gaeltarta agus an plán teanga. Ach níl toirt muoinú cí a díú i seo. Ní ró ach million cotha ar foiil de policy in idir Gaeltarte, cé go ní smó airgid de leis na cospaí ar fád seo a thar green. Ar nós cuasaí tríú level, nua a thar a bhaim, múintearí agus cígurí breise arcú, muoinú breise do scálna agus a léhéid. Muoitar go bhfuil plán teanga mar last chance saloon ag loch na Gaeltarte leis an Gaelic a chléinú. In aineann seo, fuair much na Gaeltarte bulle trom, nuair a dúrú lá ná mé go leor airgid ar foiil leis an plán teanga a thar a bhaim mar a leoch siad amá. Le breis bhéanais bhí agrais agus daoine eitiúil ag tro le ceile chun na plán na seo a dhearú. Anis is cé díobh abhranú a dhéanú orthú a lig. Ní tús leide mar a dógar an tarastéit Joe McHugh an náam ach másla de phobal Gaeltarte. Bháil sin féin 5 milliún a thuirt a plán in éisteach sa Gaelic agus a Gaeltarte a chore le ceile ag conrú na Gaeilge. Tá 5 milliún a thuirteogainn de ceiste ratha údaras na Gaeilge agus 5 milliún do ceiste capital. Tá 4 milliún a bháilú againn a thuirt an plánal teanga. Tá an táirgid seo luaite sa bháid againn a nuas ar catechas an rialtas. Agus 10 milliún sa bhris máilta againn leis an policy ideas Gaeltarte a bhainiú a gceart. Agus 1.3 milliún a bháilú againn le tús a chorla ina tréna le lein Gaelic a bhainú go heabhar múintearí. Agus málan suas le 3 milliún a thar foiil le hé cultural a bhainú ag sreid a worry. Ní mór than rialtas a bheith onraice faoin steid an teanga. Is gaidún díú iste ar an Gaeltart agus an Gaelic inis, agus an éistear cria dhéanú inis go méid sí ag an cid glúine. Minister, you've announced a number of tax measures, and I want to welcome some of those and others I don't welcome. I want to welcome your proposal in line with my party's view in terms of commercial stamp duty. We've argued for this for a number of years now, that it would be increased. Commercial lending and overheating played a huge part in the banking collapse. It is important that we monitor it and take action to cool it, and I support the increase in the excise in tobacco, not because it raises any money, but because I believe that increasing the price will mean that our people, or less of our people, will die from cancer and more of our people will have better health outcomes. But there is no evidence, none whatsoever, to justify that it will raise any money. In fact, the opposite is just as likely. And if you don't believe me, ask the Revenue Commissioners. But you've put a figure beside it, and I believe that is misleading, to say the least. Minister, today you maintain the Help to Buy scheme, a scheme that has cost the Irish taxpayer €40 million and contributed in no small way to seeing house prices increase by €50 every day across the state. And Minister, the previous Minister for Finance made a commitment that he would publish that report before Budget Day. You reneged in that commitment. You wrote to me in relation to the fact that you were reneging it, but you shared it with other deputies in this House, and I think that is not acceptable, and information in relation to Budget Day should be provided to all deputies on an equal basis. And I think that's not... I wouldn't have expected you to do something like that there, Minister, and I think you should not follow that in the future. But this scheme is a scheme that directly transfers money from taxpayers' pockets, as we know, into the pockets of the developer, while it prices ordinary families out of the market. So let me repeat once again for you now as Minister for Finance. The housing crisis is a supply-side problem. Stoking up demand only makes the situation worse by inevitably leading to house price increases. You should do the right thing, and you should abolish the scheme immediately. Now, let's not forget that it was Fianna Fáil who originally proposed their own version of the Help to Buy scheme, and the scheme wouldn't be in place only for Fianna Fáil's facilitation of the passing of that legislation through the Oireachtas. And this shows the contamination of Fine Gael by Fianna Fáil in the new government arrangement. But thankfully, Minister, you have rejected Barry Cowan's demand for a £240 million tax cut for developers, so the contamination is clearly not complete yet. Most people who access this Help to Buy scheme don't even need it to secure a deposit. That was the big lie that was given at the start. It was to help people get a deposit. We see from the figures that that is simply not the case, and it is money that goes simply on the price of a house. No real benefit for families. House prices increase. Only the developers are the winners in this one, and I believe, for one, that they have been bailed out once too often. Retaining the 9% rate for hotels that are full and are charging higher and higher prices while not respecting their workers' rights is a political cowardice. I accept that not all hotels are full or taking advantage of demand to hike up prices, but the overall trend in the sector is one that no longer justifies a tax break. And I am speaking specifically about hotels in Dublin. Many of them are owned by international investors, and these international investors are soaking up most of the €190 million tax break that could be money working towards emergency housing, paying teachers or nurses, or building our infrastructure. That's where this should go. We should retain the 9% for the rest of the sector, but hotel beds, there's no justification for it. The phasing out of mortgage interest relief will hit many struggling families. 419,000 people will be worse off. This could cost families who had to buy at the peak of the crisis hundreds of euro. And we know that there's nearly 80,000 family homes that are still in mortgage distress. And how will this affect them? It will just put them further into distress. The picture of this budget becomes clear. All the talk of new politics is out the window. It's the same old stories. The expert warn us that cutting taxes risks overheating and jeopardises our tax base. History tells us that outdated or failed tax breaks must be ended. But today we have tax cuts on the double, and failed costly schemes like the Help to Buy are left virtually untouched. Nothing has changed. There will be no different results in healthcare for citizens from a budget that does what the establishment parties have always done. Throw it all away, protect the powerful lobbies, and expect our hospitals and schools to run on the crumbs that are given to them. This is a budget drawn up by the political insiders to suit them and their friends. It's not a budget for Ireland in the year of 2017. In the world of 2017, it's a different place. Tan down a ghetto, agus níl dara sí sa wali ogan, ag ahan school and cotex down a leak a ghetto hon dunish. The global context is changing, and not in a good way. Our national debt remains one of the highest in the world when taken as a percentage of GNI star, which strips out distortions unique to our economy. Low interest rates, quantitative easings and low oil prices and other favourable winds will always not be blowing in our favour. On the other hand, the impact of Brexit, which the ESRI and others fear may be underestimated by the Minister's own projection, is a storm that is not going to miss us. On a whole range of other issues, you have done nothing or simply the bare minimum. The more the government insists everything is fine with our corporation tax system, the more problems stick out. Everything is not fine, Minister, and it's not unpatriotic to say that. I welcome the move to cap the intellectual property that could be written off against profits of 80%. I'm amazed that you can be so precise at how much this will raise, because when we asked the Department of Finance just a number of weeks ago, figures couldn't be produced. Even here, though, I'm disappointed, but not surprised, to see yet again that you have built in a nice get-out clause into this year's budget. The cap in relation to the write-off of intellectual property will not apply to companies that have onshored hundreds of billions of intellectual property in the state over the past years. In a year, we have seen annual capital allowances claims for intangible assets increase from £2.7 billion up to £28.9 billion, due to the onshoring of international property by multinational companies. In other words, what you're doing, Minister, is you're leaving the door firmly open for these companies, many of them, we know who they are, they're Apple and some of the other big multinational companies, to be able to write down their tax liabilities to a minimum level because you have said it will only apply from tonight onwards. And that is wrong. And you should have taken action not to set it from today. You're taking the easy option, making a change knowing well that the tax leakage already in process will not be stopped. The big movement of IP onshore in recent years will go untaxed. The winds are changing internationally, and it's time to start building a real industrial policy, not one built on unsustainable loopholes. The 12.5% corporation tax rate is not in question. Scaremongering does not add to the debate. This sovereign state maintains the right to set our own tax rates. Nobody has a better understanding of that and the economic importance of that sovereignty than Sinn Féin. There are, however, huge challenges coming down the road, and the government again has shown why it's not up to the challenges. They still have their head in the sand, and I have major concerns that your government's corporate tax policy is built in sand. We've seen corporation tax receipts increase from £3.9 billion in 2012 to nearly £8 billion in 2017. And what makes this tax head especially risky is the concentration of receipts among large multinationals, with only 10 payers accounting for 37% of the total revenue in 2016. I shudder to think of the risks of this exposure, given international tax policy developments. And we are, Minister, facing likely into a double whammy, and US corporate tax reform and movement due from either the OECD or Europe regarding the taxation of digital profits. US corporate tax proposals mooted include the introduction of a foreign minimum tax requirement in tandem with proposed reductions in US corporate tax rate to 20%. And this could massively erode the advantage which many US companies currently avail of here. Meanwhile, the EU digital tax proposal now has the backing of 10 EU countries and could be brought in through enhanced cooperation next year, meaning it can go ahead without us but would still sharply affect us. Whichever measures are enacted either by the OECD or EU, they would no doubt further erode the tax advantage that we have. So we could be facing into a whole different economic reality in this state if our tax advantage is taken away over the coming years. And I have no doubt that we are becoming increasingly isolated in these matters. And we're not isolated because the 12.5% tax rate, which my party and the vast majority here in this House supports. We are isolated because of how we allow companies resident here to minimise their taxes to almost a point of zero. We as a state are compounding our past mistakes. Look at the Apple case, for example. It has become an embarrassment and one of your own making. Instead of owning up to the new reality and dealing with the issues facing the state, you have doubled down. And what you're trying to convince, and it's bizarre, you're trying to convince a European court that a company incorporated here without a headquarters, without a presence, without a physical presence, without any staff, without a computer, without a desk, without a telephone, generated €104 billion of profits. And because of a loophole in our tax legislation, they weren't going to be taxing any of these profits. And you're trying to convince the EU that actually the other company that did have a physical presence, that did have employees, that did have the computers, the desks, the management structures, that organised the distribution, manufacturing of all of Apple products outside the Americas is not the company that actually generated those profits. It's laughable, Minister. But not only that, you've made it worse. You've made it worse because you did not follow through on the legal binding obligation of this state to collect the €13 billion plus interest from Apple and derive them of that illegal state aid. And now we're being taken to court for the second time. In the courts, £3.6 million already spent on suit-up lawyers to take an appeal which is not in our interest, to take an appeal that we don't get this money. It's absolutely unbelievable that this is where our government are at, in the middle of a housing crisis, in the middle of a health crisis, in the middle of all of the different pressures that we have, that this is your priority in terms of investment. Minister, last week we learned about the research and development tax credit and who was getting the benefit from this credit. And again, you've announced no changes to the R&D tax credit. So let's look at what's happening. On Budget Day last year, you published a report on Budget Day, and it said that action should be taken. It said that the government should take action to make sure that this tax credit does not run away, that we do not have increasing costs in terms of the tax credit. It offered a number of solutions where it couldn't be availed of by people getting it over and over and again. We've seen from documents that I got from Freedom Information that 65% of this €700 million tax credit is going to the top 10 companies. It is unbelievable. And indeed, in the internal documents, officials within the department are questioning whether companies are inflating the R&D artificially to avail of this tax credit, but yet you decide no action to be taken in that. No action also to be taken in relation to the bankers. Minister, and this is a common feature here, we have banks telling us that they will not pay tax for 21 years. Banks that are under the control of the state. Other banks telling us it will be 20 years, but yet the Minister takes no measures to introduce, which you could do, reintroduce the measure that Brian Lenihan originally brought in, which would see the losses that are carried forward only to be applied to 50% of the profits in any given year. It is unforgivable that banks that are making a profit of €1 billion, and as AIB did, 800 million in the first 6 months of this year, will not be paying profits for 2 decades. Is not acceptable, Minister, given the pressures that we are under. Minister, this could have been a very different budget, but you have returned to form. You have done what you do always. It's a budget, obviously, that has an eye on the election. It's about the resources that are available and trying to tick enough boxes that you think will please enough people to make sure that you are returned to the government benches. But, Minister, we are elected with a mandate, but we're elected to lead. We're elected to lead this country.
And at a time of crisis, we need to provide that leadership. And I said before that I will measure your budget on how it addresses the crisis in housing and health. And in those two areas, you fail. But not only fail, you fail spectacularly. I repeat it again, I cannot for the life of me understand in a €1.2 billion package that you have decided not to deliver an additional social house that was announced by Minister Coveney when he was in the department. And I can't understand, given the overrun in health, that you have given so little to health, which will not even allow them to stand still. Given the fact that our constituency office and your constituency office are inundated with the hard cases, with the real-life stories of people who are suffering as a result of policies that you introduced and your predecessor introduced on budget day, that has left so many people homeless, that has left so many people in the situation that they are, that has left so many people on languishing on waiting lists and on trolleys. Minister, you should have done something different here. It is very disappointing that this is the type of budget that you have brought forward.
Untitled Chapter.